Well, first off, I'd like to again, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for attending and participating in this. We had a great day yesterday, and I hope we'll have a good day today as well. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, CostQuest, Kroll, and Ryan. The sponsors are the ones that really make it possible to have the outside speakers, guys like Alan Bresick yesterday and Ian today. Plus the Augie later today and Mike Sadler yesterday. So it makes a really big difference in the quality of the conference, I think, to have really great speakers, and it's these sponsors that make that possible. So again, for everybody at TFI, thank you so much. I mentioned yesterday a little bit about the TFI universe, and I wanted to talk a bit about that to Technology Futures. The first thing up, of course, is the producer of this conference. This is our 17th version of this conference. We've been doing technology forecasting since 1978. I've been with them since '84. The founder, John Vanston, is actually in attendance with us today. I'm not going to break him out and make him say hi, but hi, Dad. Congratulations on starting a company that's still here after 40 plus years. Almost as long as TFI has been around, a group called the Communications Technology Forecasting Group has been around as well. It was started in 1985. And what this group does is support the technology forecasting, both methodology and also technology forecasting forecasts in the communications area. The people and the companies have changed over the years, but the mission has stayed basically the same through a number of generations of technology. The current members are AT&T, Charter, Comcast, and Cox. So thank you, folks, for supporting the forecasts, many of which are that I will show you and Ray will show you shortly. Carrie's going to talk about the leadership mindset success in a minute, but before we get to that, I wanted to say a few more words about the nonprofits that we're involved with. The first is TFI Projects that we launched this time last year. TFI Projects is about applying technology and technology forecasting, and sometimes the arts to help people make better decisions, both on an individual level, but also on a societal level. A lot of the nonprofit things we do in artificial intelligence, for example, forecasting that goes in under TFI Projects. Just to give you an example, one thing I do is I've been doing some technology forecasts for how AI is going to change the forecasting profession. And what we're finding is that, at least in some types of forecasting, AI does as well as traditional statistical methods. So that's one of the things we do in technology TFI Projects. Another one I wanted to mention was ART84. ART84 has been around for about 5 years. It's now part of TFI Projects. But with ART84, we basically produce art and exhibits, including art, dance, and music exhibits through various methods, including live events, media, and technology. One of the things we do, we're working on right now is a production called Geraldine's Place. That's an immersion room, and I'll hopefully talk to you about that a little bit more this afternoon. Anyway, if you want to learn more, you can go to the websites that are given here. Now, I mentioned yesterday that Carrie Vanston had launched a rebranded product called Leadership Mindset Success. And what I wanted to do is, since so many of you know Carrie, I wanted to give her an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what she's doing there. So Carrie, can you take over for a second?
Sure. Thanks, Larry. So do you ever feel like you're just not quite where you want to be in life? So many motivated executives and entrepreneurs just feel stuck and frustrated because they're either in transition or they just really want to make a bigger impact. So I'm Carrie Vanston, and with my proven leadership mindset success system, I support you in connecting with what you really want and shifting your mindset and leadership levels to higher levels so you can achieve your goals quicker and with more joy and abundance. My system includes an assessment that shows where you are under stress and where you are under normal circumstances and how you can raise it. I do one-on-one. I have 2 one-on-one programs. I do workshops, I do presentations, and then just recently I've started a mastermind, and I'm on my second session of the mastermind, which starts in February. Many of you might be a good fit. If you'd like to learn more, know more about that, a little bit is that it's a small group of people that just really support each other in achieving your dreams and make a bigger impact in the world. If you'd like to know more about that, I'd love to talk to you. You can just find me at www.followupwithcarrie.com, Carrie, and you can make a real easy, make a half-hour calendar event with me and we can talk, or you can look me up on carrievanston.com or just give me a call from the contact information. I would absolutely love to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
You're welcome. So, okay, here is the schedule for today on the right. The rest of this hour, myself and Ray Hodges will give you an update on the technology forecast from TFI. Then at 2 o'clock sharp, we'll have Ian Gillett join us to give the wireless keynote, moderated by Ruben Miranda of Kroll. We'll have a discussion session afterwards, and roughly at I think about 3:15, we'll take a break. So think about part of that mid-afternoon discussion session, bring a break. Then at 3:30, Augie will come and give us the communication technology update. Then at 4:30 to 5, we'll have a discussion session. But I have a special presentation on like what I call XR, extended reality, that I'd like to squeeze in there probably at for about 15 minutes during that discussion session. And then at 5, we'll have the virtual networking and reception again. So that's the day. And so from here, I'll go on to talk about the broadband forecast. So I know some of you haven't heard me talk about forecasting before. I know a lot of you have heard me talk many years about forecasting, and you might get a little bit bored, but I would like to go through some basics real quick for those of you that are new to the game. Basically, I'm a technology forecaster and have been for a long, long time. And what technology forecasters do is we forecast performance improvement, we forecast cost improvement. We also forecast how new technologies adopt it, and often it's important how new technology replaces old technology. And then we also spend a lot of time thinking about what are the impacts of those technology changes. And as it turns out, those types of things are exactly what you need for estimating lives and values of large capital investment. So therefore, we've been involved with valuation and assessment and so forth of assets for a long time. The tools we use in technology forecasting are basically some fundamental models of how technology changes over time, how it progresses, how it's adopted, and we'll see some examples in a minute. We use analogies a lot, as you might imagine. We also have a method called drivers and constraints, where we see what's driving the adoption of a technology and what's constraining it and how those will resolve over time. And then finally, of course, we depend on expert opinion quite a bit. Now, I mentioned I've been doing this for decades now, and we've learned a couple things. One is that the fundamental technology trends of the type I'll see are relentless. They may be sometimes slow moving, but they just are relentless. And what we've also found is betting against these trends is pretty futile. and then finally, that the fundamental technology trends tend to destroy value in the old technology. And I had this brought to my attention very clearly in a bankruptcy case I was involved with a couple of years ago. It involved a large telco that was heavily invested in copper technology, and the bandwidth requirements increasing caused that technology to be obsolete, and it involved in the basic outcome was writing off $4 billion of investment. So it really does have some fundamental impacts, technology change. That brings us to the one of the forecasts we've been doing the longest. That's the industry broadband forecast. First, this is a classic example of the performance of a technology improving over time exponentially. You see, we have these funny scales, semi-logarithmic logarithmic scale. That means we have constant improvement. So in the case of broadband, we've been seeing an improvement of about 35% a year. And that's been going on since the early days of broadband. In fact, we first started tracking it when it was analog modems. And so we are now mostly in the 1 gigabit per second range, but some people, can get, 2 or 3 gigabits, and people are now talking about 10 gigabits as being in the future. That's the 10K that Alan was talking about yesterday. Now, the way we've generally looked at this is a series of technology substitutions. So in this example, the broadband, this blue line to the left, is basically the percentage of households that have broadband, that use broadband. And you can see it's an S-shaped curve over time. And then each generation that's come since then has been another S-shaped curve, replacing all your previous generations. So this purple line to the right is the 100 megabits per second generation, another S-shaped curve, and then the blue line is the next generation, which is 300 megabits per second and above, and that includes a gigabit. So where we are now in 2022, or year in 2021, is right about here, and that is we're well into the 300 megabit per second generation. Many of us are tuned in on cable modems at that rate, or some of us are on fiber at that rate or above. Most of us are at least 100 megabits per second, so we're on this curve. Then, fortunately, fewer of us are on slower speeds. So that's adding the separate curve for 1 gig and above. With 1 gig, of course, we're still very low in that adoption. But by 2025, we're forecasting the majority of people will be at a gigabit or above. Now, the way that most of us see this, and you're probably very familiar if you've been watching TFI Forecasts for a long time, is this series of bell-shaped curves. This is just a translation of those S-shaped curves into the life cycle for each generation. And so you can see that we're well onto the life cycle of 300 megabits per second and above. Now, one thing I do is update this every year with the latest data. Most of the data points here are generally from the FCC Form 477s. There's always a large lag between we get them when the data is collected and when I actually see them when they're published. They have not been redone for this year yet, and so I haven't updated this chart yet, but I will sometime this year and post it as soon as we get new data. But everything I can tell is totally accurate. Now, one thing we can do is we can take the weighted average of those generation to get back to the trend line of data rate, which says on average right now we should be at around an average of 170 megabits per second, 180, averaging the people that are at a gig, people that are 300 megabits per second, the people that are at 100, et cetera. And that's right about where we are from independent sources. So this line is definitely of constant improvement in speed, is following the traditional models very well based on the generations. Now, being a Texan, I'm probably, it's possible for me not to brag. So I'm going to brag a little bit about how good these forecasts have been. This is from 1999, our forecast for broadband. This was before there was broadband. So most of everybody at this point were using dial-up modems when we made this forecast. You can see this is the overall broadband forecast, and this purple line here is the 100 megabits per second and above. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close to what was actually happened. And I really show this not so much to brag, but to show that we can, using these methods, forecast developments well in advance, even though they take place over many years. And one thing I wanted to mention is that these curves that I've been showing you, the S-shaped curves, as well as the bell curves, are subscribers, or how many people are actually using broadband at these speeds. There's a relationship between that curve, these curves, and actual required availability. You can't serve a customer unless you actually they have access to your service. So if the green line here is, say, the subscribers for 100 megabits per second and above, the purple line is the minimal availability to provide that much service. So that the purple line here actually gives you a target for what a cable company or a telco need to do to provide this level of broadband service to that many customers. And we've always used this relationship to set targets for the modernization in the by the carrier or the company's provider in terms of upgrading their network to provide enough speed. And so often it's this purple curve that we use to make a recommendation for, say, lives of copper cable or for coaxial cable. This is the same thing, showing the 300 megabits per second and above, and the required availability of provide at least 300 megabits per second and above service. And what we're saying is right now, to meet, it needs to be about 60% of homes to be competitive as a carrier. By 2025, you need to essentially have 100% at 300 megabits per second and above as a target. So expect to see a lot more fiber in the networks to meet that goal. Generally, what we found over time is cable companies do a pretty good job of meeting this because of their technology. The telcos, unless they're using fiber, have a tough time keeping up with these rates. So to summarize the broadband, the speeds continue to increase. It's one of these relentless trends that I was talking about to start with. 100 megabits per second is sort of the standard now. 300 at least and above is optimal. And in the future, we're looking at from 1 gig to 10 gigabits per second, the 10G that Alan was talking about. And that's going to mean deploying fiber and replacing other equipment sooner rather than later. One thing I didn't mention, but that Ray's going to talk about as well as Ian, is there's competition from wireless now too, especially 5G. The 5G data rates are at least the fastest ones available are meeting that 100 megabit standard I mentioned. And the fastest ones globally are meeting 250 or 300 megabits per second. And so there is definitely competition there. And the thing I've said over and over and over again is that all this means that telco copper cable is doomed. It's been for years. Now moving on to some of the, I'll skip this for now. Moving on to some of the video forecasts that y'all are used to seeing. One thing we've been forecasting really since the beginning is the replacement of traditional TV, either broadcast or multi-channel cable, being replaced by streaming TV, the Netflix, for example, of the world, or Amazon's, or Hulu, or what have you. This is based on data from Nielsen, so it's very TV focused. But this basically shows you the percentage of hours that we spend watching traditional TV on televisions versus how much time we've been spending watching streaming TV. And this has been a classic S-shaped adoption or substitution, if you will, of a new technology streaming for an old technology traditional. And there's a couple implications of this. One is that the multi-channel model of cable is indeed declining. But the other implication is it's not declining so fast that we can't keep serving it. So the cable companies have the interesting situation of continuing to improve broadband for streaming and other applications, where at the same time having to serve traditional multi-channel at the same time for at least another decade. Now, this is a simplified version of a forecast I've been showing you for a long time. The one on the right is what you're used to seeing. The Nielsen has changed the way they publicly report data, and so they're not showing as much detail as they were. So we were replacing this old forecast that I used to show you with a lot of quarterly data with a much simpler version that just has the basic percentage in each. But it's the same principle that people are streaming more and spending less time on traditional multi-channel and broadcast. Another chart I've just showed over the years, pretty much since the start, has been the trend in Netflix streaming paid members. The distinction between US and Canada is just a statistical thing. Is that at first Netflix reported just the US, and then they added Canada, and they only report North America now. But the percentage of households has been pretty much insensitive to that. In 2020, and actually in 2021, those three hollow data points there, they've actually fallen off the trend. So Netflix has now lost some market share and some customers to some of their competitors. And so what are they doing? Well, they're raising their prices to keep the revenue up. But anyway, we had traditionally used Netflix as indicative of the streaming market as a whole because total data was hard to get. But I think now we're going to have to abandon this plan because Netflix is no longer indicative. It's just one of many competitors, although it's still a leader. But the point is, it goes to show that this streaming, whether it's on a TV or whether it's on a laptop or whether it's on an iPhone or an Android, is something that's taking up more and more of our hours spent of viewing, and it's reached well over 50% of households. Another forecast area that I show you year after year is the high definition television in its various forms. We started forecasting HDTV before 2000. And the forecast turned out much like what actually happened in this blue line over to the left. The current generation, of course, is 4K, and we've just recently reached about 50% of households having 4K, also called 4K UHD. And now 8K is on the fore. We're still on the forefront. We're still at less than 1%, probably won't get to 1% of households for another couple of years, but we expect it to follow the same pattern with an S-shaped adoption, as prices fall and familiarity increases and so forth, that we'll see the same pattern with HK that we saw with the 4K and with HDTV. Now, Augie is sure to say when he gets his presentation this afternoon that you can't tell the difference between 8K and 4K. And he's probably right in most viewing situations, but there are lots of viewing situations where the 8K will come in handy. And we said the same thing about 4K. And again, there were situations where it was useful. And besides, the sales guys will always figure out how to get us to change anyway. So obviously, when we make these forecasts with less than 1%, we are relying on analogies. We're relying on drivers as constraints. It's nothing for sure, but it's the same situation we had with HDTV and with 4K. We're using the same methods to make these forecasts. So my prediction is that we will definitely see the 8K generation come and dominate in the next 10 years or so. And one thing that it has why is meaningful is that every time we increase this resolution of screen size, we increase how much data bandwidth we need to go that fast. So with HDTV, you need about 4 megs bit per second. With 4K, it's about 18. With 8K, it'll jump up to about 60 at least, and that's quite a bit more. I'll close with the implications for cable companies and all this. Basically, we see the continued loss of multi-channel TV subscriptions. That's not going to change. But in the meantime, as I said, they need to provide both multi-channel and enhanced broadband at the same time. We're seeing competition from wireless. Also, we are seeing that the telcos have stepped up their game. They're adopting fiber very quickly now, including fiber to the home. And whereas before they were losing market share to cable companies, now they're reversing that trend. Also, there's as it was mentioned by Alan yesterday, the HFC networks are energy inefficient. And so this is sort of the situation the cable companies are dealing with. What it basically means is that they need to increase their investment in fiber, including going fiber deep, if not fiber to the home, but certainly fiber deep. But there's not going to be a really commensurate increase in revenue because they're actually probably losing revenue for multi-channel. They can't really increase the prices for broadband because of competition from various sources. And so they're basically going to have a situation where the coaxial cable will probably still be there in use, but because of the investment they're having to make in fiber to keep up, the relative value of the coax will probably go down over time. So that's kind of the situation I see there for coax. So anyway, that's what I have for broadband. We'll probably hold questions for the discussion session later in the afternoon so that I can turn it over to Ray.
Can make them advance. Yeah, there we go. Okay. But the original trick in forecasting the wireless was trying to decide how many people would ultimately end up with a wireless telephone. And we started off by saying, well, it's generally, you could expect the ultimate market to be the number of people. You can probably will never get there where everybody has one, but we may come close, and it's no reason that I could see that we would greatly exceed that. Turns out, though, that it was more than people. It was people and their devices. And looking a little closer, it's not a lot of applications don't even involve people. It can be machine to machine. So we got people with multiple devices, and we got machines connecting to each other in addition. And while we still forecast for a number of years as one trend that included all applications, we've now found out that it's probably advantageous to separate the two between the devices that involve people and data-only devices. So the total trend line shows continued growth as we would expect, but then we need to look a little deeper into where that growth is coming from. And it's, we see that we have exceeded the number of people that actually have telephones. And we've been able to get from different surveys, and surveys are out every now and then, that show how many people actually have a telephone. And it's always, depending on the survey, it's always significantly less than 100%. A lot of people, but not approaching 100%. Sometimes I see a survey that is, but when you read it, it's maybe percent of adults or percent of some of a group. When you're looking at percent of total population, it's somewhere north of 80%, lower than 90. And so if we look at, well, if everybody doesn't have a telephone, that means that a lot of people have devices other than telephones, or more than one telephone, or there's other things going on out there in the network. And so we now forecast, just break it out, and we try to forecast how many are used for standard connections and how many are used for data only, machine to machine type applications. And when we look at it, there's really different drivers, really different issues involved. The machine to machine has a wide range of bandwidth requirements. If you're wanting your washing machine to tell you when the washing's complete and send you a signal, that's a completely different bandwidth requirement than perhaps you would have in two vehicles that were trying to see everything around them and communicate with each other, and all sorts of additional needs that require enormous bandwidth. There's also a lot of difference in the need for geographic coverages. Some can be handled just by Wi-Fi for short distance and even Bluetooth, but others need the cellular network or extended network that can get to cover much greater distances and be mobile as well as fixed. And also, you would pay a lot more for a machine type connection that has a high value on production equipment or something that really adds a lot of value. But if it's like I said, notifying you when your wash is done, you wouldn't want to have to pay much for that device. So 5G is designed to meet all of those requirements. It was designed from the ground up. You can use it for all the applications. It was built with that in mind. And so when we look at all the possible things out there that could be connected to each other, we hear numbers that are in the many billions. But we have to look more, our interest, or my interest at least, is how many will end up in being cellular connections, because that's what I'm trying to forecast and what I'm focused on here. So there are some that are M2M type things and the Internet of Things, where we see the big number, that are simply tags and things that don't require a permanent connection. There's also mobile M2M, which is still in the billions, but there's some that don't require cellular connections. And then we get down to the ones that require cellular connections. We're still talking into hundreds of millions. It's hard to quantify. We don't know exactly how many, but we're into hundreds of millions. And in our forecasts, our historical points are primarily from the CTA, Cellular Industry Association, and carrier provided data that we receive when we do our various studies, and some that they publish. The year-end 2020 data point, I don't have it officially yet from the CTIA. Our estimate, best view at this time, is 246.5 million. excuse me, the 221 is still an estimate from the CTIA, but based on that, our forecast and best view of year end 2022 is 246.5 million. And this is our forecast that are broken into the two pieces, the standard connections and the M2M or data only connections. And you can see that we have virtually plateaued with people buying an iPhone simply to be communicate as in the voice mode or people-to-people type communications is and has been saturated for a while. The growth is in the data devices and M2M. And here again, I think I've pretty much covered this on the previous slide about where the data points came from. That's up on this slide, but we're talking about 2022 is still an estimate at this point. And the chart that Larry was showing where we have that appears to be a life cycle chart. I'd like to put a little bit of a disclaimer on it. Now, we're not talking about a pure life cycle. There are also things that are not captured in this forecast, the substitution of one technology for the other, that would also go into a true life cycle curve, such as replacements with intergeneration and some other issues before I could put it up and say this is the life cycle. It's close, but it's not exactly the life cycle. But it's a good way to demonstrate the growth of each generation and how we have been changing over time. And the 5G, once again, is basically an analogy that it's going to come up, take off at and adopt at about the same rate as the 4G and the 3G and the previous generations. And that has turned out to be very true. And I guess maybe by another year, we may be talking about, well, when do we put a little dot for the 6G, which is already, on a lot of people's radar at this point. But we have, let's see, I got something right here. I had something covering my slide that I had to get off the screen, sorry. We have that, once again, I'm getting my screen covered up with notes coming in. The drivers for the new generation is that the mobile traffic is growing much faster, more rapidly than the connections. In fact, the standard connections essentially are very low growth, growing at about no greater than the growth in the overall population. The M2M connections are growing much faster, and we have greatly improving cost performance of the new technology. It's not only that we need the bandwidth to serve additional customers, but we can serve existing customers and future customers at lower cost by adopting the more efficient new 5G technology. So 5G technology is more efficient for the embedded base as well as the future growth. And to summarize it up, 5G is here to save today. It's the right technology at the right time. So that covers my formal presentation, and I'll let Larry decide when we can take questions.
Yeah, we have plenty of time for questions. Maybe so we can see everybody, we can stop screen sharing, Ray. So I had one question come over the chat line, and that was whether the basic TFI broadband forecast had been updated for this year since last year. The answer to that is no, it has not. The FCC has not updated their data. last couple of years, they actually got it out before the conference. This year, they hadn't. I've been pretty much checking on a daily basis. If it comes in reasonably soon, I'll go ahead and update the charts with that data. Otherwise, I will use other available data to do estimates and come up with a 2022 version that's different than the most recent 2021 version. But everything I can tell is that those trends are still on track. So stay tuned for more. Does anybody else have any questions for either Ray or me?
Hey, Larry, it's Gary. Hey, I was wondering, do you have any observations on whether on life cycles on the technologies as they've evolved, have they shortened? Are they about the same? When you look at 2G to 3G or 5G to newer technologies?
I don't know if there's a really consistent pattern one way or the other. I mean, sometimes you'll hear people say, gosh, they're getting shorter and shorter, but they're actually been reasonably consistent and therefore predictable. So I'd say basically the shape of those curves are somewhat similar, maybe getting a little bit faster, but nothing dramatic. And which is not completely crazy because each of these substitutions, whether it's on the wireless side or the wireline side, it require incredible amount of investment. And when you have that much capital investment, you can only upgrade so often and so fast. You just can't afford to walk away from the old technology too quickly, and you can't afford to buy new technology too quickly. So that tends to stabilize things a bit.
Yeah, one thing that kind of clouds that issue with the wireless is the definition of, or the transition from generation to generation is always kind of muddy about, is this really 4G? Is it 3G on steroids, or is it 4G? And is it 4G or is it 5G? Because technology keeps advancing within each generation, and ways to improve and extend the life of the network keep coming about. A lot of them are foreseen, but the network keeps receiving some upgrades. But the new technology gets introduced, and the telephones that people are purchasing to work on the network, the people move to the new network a lot faster than the old network comes out. And just like with the coax cable hanging around, the copper cable hanging around the phone companies, the coax with the cable companies, the previous generations hang on longer in the network than they do out in the than the users actually use them. So they hang around in a less valuable, less utilized mode during the transitions. It's not just a clean break and a simple definition moving from one generation to the other. I don't know if that helped or made it worse, but.
Thank you, Ray.
Yep. Thank you.